In this video, we're going to show you how to install the driver's side rear strut assembly on your Ford 500. The process for the driver's side is the same as the passenger side. If you have a hubcap, go ahead and pop that off. Using your 19mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. With the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel, pull it off, and set it aside. Using a 13mm wrench, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the two bolts holding our caliper to the bracket. I'm going to spin those out and remove them. Using a small pry bar, go ahead and work the caliper off. Now that we have our caliper off, I'm going to go ahead and push this over and set that on top of the link arm here. I want to go ahead and remove our caliper bracket. On the back side, there's two 15mm bolts. And get a ratchet on there. Now we have the lower bolt removed. I'm going to do the same for the upper. I'm going to hold on to that caliper bracket when you remove this bolt. Remove that bolt and then slide the caliper bracket with the pads off. Set that aside. Now on our particular rotor here, we have a T40 Torx bit screw or bolt right here that is going through to the face of the wheel hub. Now if your vehicle does not have this, it's not critical to the operation of the vehicle. Ours happens to have it, so we're going to loosen and remove it. Once you have that out, I'm going to go ahead and remove that rotor, set it aside. On the bottom side of the strut assembly here, there's a 15mm bolt that goes through into the rear control arm here. Now, you can remove it, but what we're going to do is just thread that in by hand, just a few threads. It's going to work as a retainer to hold that strut from popping off anywhere. Using our jack, we're going to put it under the rear control arm here. Just gently apply a little bit of pressure to it. Not going to raise up the suspension much. And if you come to the outboard portion here, there's a forward link arm that goes through to the knuckle itself. That's a 15mm bolt. Let's go ahead and loosen that bolt. Lower the jack. Slide this over to our low portion of our strut. I'm going to put the jack just underneath that strut. I'm going to remove that bolt. Now we have a pry bar underneath behind the strut assembly. What we're going to try and do is work our strut off of the sleeve or the shaft coming off of the arm here. Now at this point you can see that the sleeve here is separated from the unit on the lower portion of our strut. So we can remove our jack altogether. We'll lower the vehicle and continue from the top side of that strut. Now in the upper portion of our strut assembly is 3 bolts holding this to the chassis of the vehicle or the body of the vehicle. There's a 13mm bolt right on the front here. We're going to use our swivel head with extension. Get on up there and loosen and remove this. And this one here, we're going to use our ratchet on it due to clearance issues with the air tool. And get to a point where you can actually spin that bolt out by hand and pull that out. And you want to go ahead and reposition your brake caliper. And we're going to go ahead and use a securing strap just to pull this off here. Now the driver's side back seat, you're going to go ahead, pull the strap and pop down the seat here. Right here, you're going to locate a plastic button. You're going to use your trim tool. Go ahead and pop that out. Pop this trim button here. Pull this material out and tuck that aside. On the back side of the strut, I'm going to use our 10mm socket and swivel. I'm going to remove that bolt there. There's one on the front side we need to get to. You're now going to want to go ahead and remove this forward bolt right here. It's a 15mm. We're going to use our swivel. And we're going to remove that arm. Just drop that down. Using a 15mm socket, go ahead and loosen and remove the front driver's side subframe bolt. Once you have your bolt out, go ahead and set that aside. Before we remove the driver's side rear subframe bolt, you want to make sure that you put a jack underneath the subframe itself. We're going to just support that. We're not going to lift up the vehicle, just support it in place. Right here we have a driver's side forward mounted subframe bracket. We're going to use a 13mm socket to loosen these bolts. We don't have to remove it, we just want to have that a bit of play right there. We can slowly lower the jack. This is going to lower the driver's side portion of the subframe. Just let it down a little bit. We're going to go back and pull that strut. If the subframe isn't down far enough, we'll just come over here, continue to lower this down a couple turns or just a little bit until we can get that strut out safely. On our original strut assembly, there were 2 bolts that were put in through the top side. I want to go ahead, loosen and remove them on the new component. Set these aside for now. Let's go ahead and install the strut assembly into the vehicle. Now with the strut set up into place, let's see if we can just get a couple of these bolts started by hand. All right, we have these 3 bolts all started by hand. That'll stabilize that strut assembly. I'm going to raise up our cradle here. I'm going to install our subframe mount bush bolts here. Now we're going to run this bolt up, but we're not going to tighten it. Let's go ahead and install the front bolts. We'll line up our bracket and we'll tighten down these 2 bolts here. And go ahead and install this bolt. Let's tighten down our rear bolt. With that being tight, we can now go ahead and remove the jack from the cradle. Now on the inside of the vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and install these 2 bolts that we previously removed. Install that one there, and this one on the back side. And we'll tighten those down. Just want to make sure that those are nice and tight. With those 2 upper strut bolts installed, we'll go ahead and install our liner here. Just got to kind of manipulate this around, tuck it in like that. Don't get our lower button popped in first. It doesn't matter the order of these. Once those are in, go ahead and flip up the seat. I'm going to use our ratchet. Okay, with that one nice and tight, let's go ahead and tighten down the other 2. Use your pry bar to go between the upper part of the knuckle and the bottom part of the upper control arm and just pry this down. I'll go ahead and line that up. So I was able to use the pry bar, pry this down, and with my foot, I just push this onto that little sleeve there. Tapped it into place. Let's now go ahead and get our bolt installed. I'm going to apply some blue Loctite to these threads. And once that's caught, let's go ahead and snug it down. Let's go ahead and install our bolt here. Apply some blue Loctite to the threads. We have our jack underneath the control arm. We're going to compress our suspension a little bit. Continue to compress this up. That'll help us line up that forward link. And we put the pry bar up inside the lower control arm here. We're just going to gently pull this over, help that line up. Using our 15mm socket and ratchet, get that caught, and then we'll just switch over to our impact gun and run that in. Let's go ahead and tighten down the forward mounted bolt. We can now lower our jack off of the suspension. And go ahead and set that aside. Let's torque down the rear subframe bolt to 85 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and do the same for the front. Let's torque our bracket bolts to 41 foot-pounds. Torque our lower strut bolt to 77 foot-pounds. Let's torque the upper strut plate to body bolts to 50 foot-pounds. Do the same for the other two. I'm going to torque the link-on bolt to knuckle to 77 foot-pounds. Torque the forward link arm bolt to 81 foot-pounds. I'm going to apply some anti-seize spray to the face of the hub here. Take that brake rotor, line that up, put that on. Now if your vehicle has the Torx bit screw, go ahead and install that now. And get that started a few threads, and then we'll zip that on down. I'm going to remove my securing strap for the caliper, and I'm going to tuck that aside where it won't fall. Our next step is to install our caliper bracket. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on the caliper bracket bolt. And we're going to line that up and get that started. Do the same for the lower bolt. Get that put in. Get that started. I like to thread these in as far as I can by hand. It'll just kind of speed things up. Then I'm just going to throw a ratchet on there, snug that down. Do the same for the upper. Installing our inboard brake pad. Here's one of those little nubs that actually fits into the notch in the piston. Line that up and slide that into your, the slider here. Do the same for the outboard pad. And once you have both of the pads installed, go ahead and slide your caliper over, push in on your slider pins. You want to make sure that your slider pins are positioned properly because they're narrow on one side and then there's extended tabs on the outside. So you want to make sure that the extended tabs are not in the way of the caliper. Little slide into place. Now I'm going to install the upper bolt first. Doesn't matter which bolt you put in first. I'm just throwing the top one in for now to get that caught a few threads. Then we'll line up the bottom, position that, and thread that in. Go ahead and snug down the caliper bolts. On the top, we're going to use our gear wrench. We just have limited clearance here to the emergency brake cable there. I'm going to torque down these bolts to 26 foot-pounds. And repeat for the upper. Now our caliper bracket bolts, we have to torque those to 81 foot-pounds. Grab your wheel, line it up onto the wheel studs. Get all the lug nuts started by hand first. Once those are installed, I'm going to go ahead and snug them all down. Using your 19mm socket, let's go ahead and torque down the wheel to 95 foot-pounds. And if you're installing a hubcap, you want to look for the little notch on the bottom here. That's going to fit the valve stem. Line that up and gently tap that cap into place, and you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.